Hey, this is podcast number 2 for Standard 6.3. In this podcast, we're going to be taking a look at different types of interactions that exist between members of an ecosystem. And this goes beyond the feeding relationships that we talked about in the last podcast. So when we think about an ecosystem, within any ecosystem, each organism has its own niche. These are the physical and biological conditions that the organism lives in, and then how they actually use those conditions in order to survive. So, this seal down here uses this area in a specific way to meet its needs. There's food sources within here, maybe places for reproduction to occur, those kinds of things. That's this niche for that particular organism. Now, what we know is that within an ecosystem, you cannot have two species occupy the same niche at the same time. So if you have two species that are living in the same place and using the place in the exact same way, they will not survive. There is too much competition. What will end up happening is one of the two species will survive and the other one will not. So here is an example of some bacteria that were grown. This two bacteria, this is P. aurelia and P. caudatum, and you put them in the same type of environment, they both do really well and they show typical logistic growth. So this is where they hit their carrying capacity. And on their own, they can survive really well in this environment. But if you put the two of them together, you'll find that the P. caudatum eventually is going to get outcompeted by the aurelia. And the aurelia is the one that is going to survive, and the other one is going to actually die out because they need the exact same resources in the same space, and that can't happen. Only one of the two are going to survive. So when competition comes into play, because two organisms want the exact same thing, only one of them is going to survive. And this is what the problem was with when we talked about the invasive species. If you bring in a species to a new environment that doesn't belong there, and it occupies the same exact niche as something that's already there, there will be too much competition between the two, and one of the two will not survive that competition. So when we talk about competition, this is when two or more species want the same things, the same resources, and these are typically the necessities of life. So they would need the exact same food sources, they would need the same water, the same type of habitat. And when there is competition, there only can be one ultimate species coming out on top with that competition. The other species either have to find other ways to survive, or they won't. They'll have to move away, or they will die out. All right, another important relationship that we have within an ecosystem is predation. In predation, we have one organism that is going to capture and feed on another organism. And so we call this the predator-prey relationship. So the predator is going to be capturing and feeding on the prey. And the predator-prey are very closely related to each other. So if you look at the two populations of predator and prey, like for example here we've got a jackrabbit and we've got a bobcat. And if the jackrabbit's population goes up, like if you see this big spike right here, closely behind that the bobcat's population is also going to go up because they now have more food to eat. But once the bobcat's population gets to a certain size and they're eating all of the jackrabbit population is going to come back down, followed closely by the bobcat population coming down because they've now lost a source of food. So their population numbers, their predator and prey populations, are constantly going up and down together, and they help to control each other's populations. So as the jackrabbits get high, you get more bobcats that eat them. But then you start eating too many of them, the bobcats get too numerous, and so you end up running out of jackrabbits. Now, the number of prey is always more than the number of predators because predators need to eat more. So you always have to have more prey than you do predators when you're looking at a predator-prey relationship. All right, and the final relationship we're going to take a look at is symbiosis. In symbiosis, you have two species that share a distinct type of relationship. So they live together and they have a very distinct relationship between them. Okay, so I like to think about this like the bow and arrow. You can use a bow as a weapon, you can use an arrow as a weapon, but they're much stronger together. And that's a symbiotic relationship. Okay. Here's another one. We've seen examples of birds that will live on the back of grazing animals. They actually are there to eat the bugs off of them. But this is supposed to be a funny thing where they're saying, oh, the birds are helping to keep the hunters away from the animal. But these are just different types of symbiotic relationships. So when we talk about symbiosis, there are 3 distinct symbiotic relationships that exist within an ecosystem. The first is called mutualism. Okay? In mutualism, both species are going to benefit from the relationship. So both species are going to get something out of the relationship. So a very good example of this is a flower and an insect. Remember, insects will land on flowers and they're going to get food from eating the flower. The flower from this relationship actually gets pollinated by the insect. So the insect lands on the flower, collects pollen on its legs, goes over to the next flower and drops the pollen off. So as the insect's getting food, it's benefiting and the flower is benefiting because it is getting pollinated. Okay? And all different kinds of insects and flowers have this type of relationship. So that's called mutualism. So there's a mutual kind of agreement between them and they're both going to benefit. The second relationship is called commensalism. In commensalism, one of the members is going to benefit. The other one is actually not helped or harmed. The other one is completely unaffected by the relationship. Okay? An example of this are barnacles and whales. So if you ever look at a whale, there are little white shellfish that live on the outside of the whale. Now the whale's skin is really thick and the whale has no idea that these barnacles are there. The barnacles live there because they'll actually eat the algae off of the skin of the whale, but they're not harming the whale in any way. And the algae doesn't bother the whale and neither do the barnacles. So the barnacles are living there, they have a place to live, and they have a constant food source, so they're benefiting, but the whale could really care less whether they were there or not. So the whale is unaffected in any way. So that is an example of commensalism. The final relationship that we have is called parasitism. In parasitism, you have one organism that is going to benefit. It's going to live on another one. And while it's doing that, it is actually going to harm the other organism. So ticks on mammals are an example of this. A tick will bite a mammal and remove blood from the mammal. So that's a harmful relationship. And also very often ticks can transmit diseases as well. So ticks living on a mammal, mosquitoes are considered a parasitism because they will take blood away. And a lot of the different kinds of, like malaria is actually a parasite. So they take nutrients, they take resources away from the thing that it's living in, harming it by using its nutrients, hurting it in some way. So the tick benefits, the mammal is going to be harmed by the relationship. Okay, so here are our different environmental relationships. Remember, everything in an ecosystem is relying on the abiotic factors that are there. So the amount of sun, all of the water that's available, land that's there. And then within the biotic factors, there are several different kinds of relationships. So you've got your 3 types of symbiosis. So these relationships are very important. Your competition helps to keep populations in check, as well as the predator-prey relationship. So all of these different kinds of relationships are what are going to help control population numbers in ecosystems, and that therefore is going to keep an ecosystem nice and healthy.